Hello, I'm Beat News Director Rich Hosford, and welcome to this Beat News special report all about the connection to the MWRA. I am joined by DPW Director John Sanchez, who's going to sort of give us the history, the process up to now, and a look into the future of this big and expansive project. So, John, thanks for taking some time to coming in today.
No, thanks for having me. This is terrific to get up to date on what we are with this project. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I wanted to sort of start at the beginning, go back a little bit. What was sort of like the initial reasoning for, trying to make this connection to get water from the Audubon?
To the authority?
Or the Quabbin Reservoir. That's what I was looking for.
So, interestingly enough, it has to go a little bit backwards to when we really started to look at this, and it all has to do with issues at the Vine Brook treatment facility, particularly the aquifer. We've been working along. I don't know if you want me to expand on that, but
the contamination.
Right. So basically, all along, and we do this today, by the way, we have to test weekly, monthly, seasonally, and yearly for different contaminants that we have in the aquifer. And we're regulated by both DEP, the Environmental Protection Agency here in Massachusetts, as well as the EPA. So in doing that, we'd always been in compliance, and we were running along doing our thing as we do every year. And then in 2011, DEP lowered one of the standards for 1,4-dioxane. Now, the standard used to be 3 parts per billion. I mean, this is a very small amount. And with the testing methods that we had at the time, we will test all the drinking water wells, and we always had non-detect. In other words, the amount that might have been there was so small that we couldn't even detect it. So we were doing just fine. In 2011, they changed the method in which you can test for 1,4-dioxane. And at the same time, DEP now says instead of having a 3 parts per billion compliance, now it's going to be 0.3,
Right.
which is factor of 10.
Yes. So when you say they lowered the standard, it actually made it much more stringent.
Correct.
So it's just a smaller number.
Correct. It made this correct. Maybe I said it backwards. The amount that is permissible in water was lowered. So now in the first round of testing we do with that much lower standard or lower number that we have to meet, we find that several of our wells actually has this compound. We have 7 wells at the Vine Brook Treatment Plant. 3 of those wells were much higher, which one of them way higher, exceeding the new standard. So this is the first time that we now notice that something is not good at the treatment facility, 2011. Go ahead.
And where do we believe this compound came from?
So Vine Brook, the aquifer for the Vine Brook is very extensive. I mean, in fact, it goes all the way into Lexington. And it encompasses areas all the way down Blanchard Road, Muller Road, Route 3, all of Norbloom's property, up all the way to the mall. So it's very large. We know for a fact that there are 47 sites around the aquifer that contaminated the groundwater in different ways. And then if you want to back up a little bit more, in the 80s and 90s, there was a lawsuit because there were VOCs, volatile organic compounds, that all these sites had contributed to the ground. This is why the town built that treatment facility to treat for those contaminants. So we know there's contamination in the ground, but this particular one for the 1,4-dioxane and the highest numbers that we've seen comes from across the street where we added the treatment plant, which is a Norbloom property. There's a plume that comes from that area that really goes through wells 3, 4, and 5. So we know that is a fact. That's where the highest contamination for this particular compound comes from.
So the standards get changed. You find that some of the wells are contaminated, and what's the impact of that on the town's water supply?
So at the time, since we take water from 7 wells, we were able to, as all the water is mixed from different wells, now you have one water output that we put out. That number is the one that is regulated. It's not the individual wells, but the one that we put into the system. Now, at the time, we were very close to exceeding that 0.3. And we finally exceeded it a couple of years later. And then at that point, we knew that we couldn't run those wells. I mean, and that's the big issue. So at that point, we said, okay, we can't run because we're going to exceed the contaminant level. So originally in 2013, we shut down the well with the largest amount of 1,4-dioxane. And soon after that, we shut down the oldest two. So basically, the 3 wells across the street from the Nordblum property have been shut down since 2013. And just to get to the answer to that, what is the effect? Well, we lost 1/3 of the treatment capacity. We used to be able to produce about 3 million gallons of water a day from there. Now we only do 2.
Right.
Going back to 2013. In fact, the number is even lower now. It's probably closer to 1.7, because as we tried to run all the other wells harder, then now they produce less water than what they did before. But at the time, we lost 1 million. Now, like I said, we have actually lost a little more than that.
So with the combined pressure of losing, water there, and then, obviously we have the reservoir, but that's kind of dependent on, the weather, so to speak, and other factors. Is this the reason that, we've been seeing, outdoor watering, bans and restrictions? I'm sure that all this contributed to that kind of situation.
Absolutely. So it's a combination of both. So now with the Vinebrook being able to produce less water and the reservoir being a limited resource, and it's interesting because the reservoir that we have, we actually pump water from the Shoshin River to fill it. Mm-hmm. And we're only allowed to fill the reservoir when we have water in the Shoshin River. If you take it right today to the river, in Billerica, you'll see that there's no water there, which means that we can't pump water into Burlington. So since that capacity is limited, we fill the reservoir in the spring, winter and spring. Once the summer starts, it's very rare that we can pump more water into it. So we have a set amount of water that we can treat from there, which in the past we used to combine it with the ability to have 3 million gallons a day from the Vinebrook. But now we lost almost half now of what we had, which means that this limited capacity, we can't increase it, is what it is.
Right.
So those 2 things combine, and then you add a drought, which we're on a severe drought right now. So that's why we have to go into water bans. Just no other way to have enough water for fire protection and for domestic use unless we have these water bans.
So the decision's made to go to town meeting. What's sort of the process to get approval locally? I know you had to work with both from town meeting, as I mentioned, but also neighboring communities that we're going to go through. What was sort of the initial stages of this project?
So at first we tried to find a local solution. Can we do something to treat the 1,4-dioxane and to increase the capacity? Or is this plume going to go through as some other plumes do? And then we're going to restore the wells to where they were before. So all of that was studied between 13 and 15 to see if there were other solutions that we could implement prior to really joining either the authority or any local town, like say Billerica or Wilmington for that matter. When we found that those other solutions were not viable or didn't appear to be viable, so we hired a consultant to actually study this a little deeper than what we were doing. Can we put some more wells somewhere else? What are the advantages of actually doing treatment, maybe secondary treatment for other places, or joining the authority? So all of this is happening now in 2016. We get a report that pretty much recommends that we join the MWRA. And that we should abandon the Vinebrook treatment plant because of current contaminants plus future contaminants that we don't know about. And we can talk about that a little later. So that leads the selectmen into suggesting that's the direction we want to go. And again, this is 2016, beginning of 17. Now, a town meeting in 2017, town meeting forms a committee, a water study committee. And they take that report in addition to other resources to come up with their recommendation. Again, these solutions are not cheap. We're talking $27 million for what solution that we picked at the end. So as they go through a process, and I work with them, I provided information, we come into meetings and hearings with local residents, and through the process, they come to the same conclusion that the best solution for the town, for both redundancy in water quality is to join the authority. So in May of 2018, we submit an article to town meeting to ask town meeting to see if they will support the town joining the MWRA. So that's like the key point. That's
Right.
what really when the clock starts to tick is when the town meeting says, yes, we're going to switch water sources.
So you get town meeting approval, you just dig a hole in the ground, put a pipe in, and we're all done, right?
Wouldn't that be easy?
So there's, I think, a lot more the behind the scenes regulatory procedures that you have to go through. Talk about just kind of what it takes to actually join the MWRA.
Yeah, so I said recently that probably the easiest thing will be to actually dig the hole and put the pipe in the ground. So since 2018, we've been working on all the permitting that we need to do for this project. And there's been like 2 or 3 separate tracks of permits, and what we did is we moved all of them at the same time to obviously reduce the timeline for the project. So one of them is we need the governor to sign this into law, that we actually can join the MWRA. So we worked that angle. We got what we needed to do, and finally in I think January, February of last year, the governor signed it into law that we're allowed to join. So that's one track that we did there. A separate track is to start the MEPA process, which is probably the longest process that we have to do. And that involves documenting everything that we plan to do at 3 different stages. The very first one is what is called an environmental notification form, which we did at the end of 2018. Following town meeting approval, we started to work on all the forms and paperwork and backup and documents we had to present to them to get to that E and F. So we did that. First major step was to do that. And what that does is just gives an opportunity to every agency in Massachusetts to comment and to say things that we need to comply with and things that they will want us to research a little more, because they need to be convinced that we in fact don't have any other resources than to go to the MWRA. So as we go through that,
So you
it
have to
generates...
make the case, like prove it to them.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
with that, it generates a lot of questions. So that means we meet with different agencies along the way, try to clarify what they're asking so we understand so we can respond to it. Once we have all of that, which it took us a better part of 2019, we submitted a very thorough draft environmental impact report, and that was at the end of 2019. The advantage of doing what we did is that the report was so complete that once we submitted it, soon after, we were able to take the same document and roll it over into a final environmental impact report, which we did in the beginning of this year. And again, during that process, we're back to the agencies, we're back to comment periods. I mean, anybody who wants to comment can, and submit comments in writing, or again, there's public hearings that we have to attend. We get through a MEPA process, we actually got a certificate, and I think that was in April. I have a cheat sheet here, so I'm gonna
That's
look.
fine.
Because I think it was, it was in April of this year, we actually got that. And that was probably one of the biggest processes that we had to complete, which when you talk about, like, we took it from 2018 and now 2020, in 2 years, we went through this lengthy process. And that certificate, that's from MEPA, is what is used now as the application process for the interbasin transfer. So we were not done yet. This is just to say, okay, you finished that? Now let's move into interbasin transfer. A similar process happening there. So we've been going through that since the beginning of this year. Thankfully, and I'm very grateful for this, the Water Resources Commission, DCR, DEP, and all these agencies kept on working during the pandemic.
Oh.
If you recall, the governor at one point gave dispensation to all these committees and groups to stop holding hearings during the pandemic, but thankfully they did not. They continued to work, so we continue to work with them throughout this year. A lot of the meetings now are remote, obviously, but we got through a lot of that process, and in fact, we are right now to probably I think 1 meeting away from them to get their final vote from the Water Resources Commission to vote it up and down to allow us to join the MWRA. And that vote will probably happen in September,
Okay.
hopefully, if not October.
And then what's the timeline from there? And also we can talk about the fact that there's two different phases to the project.
Right, and I want to talk about that because this is like the three approaches that we took. One is the legislative and the governor. The other one is the permanent process. And the third one is we actually have to build the pipe.
Right.
So rather than wait until all of this are complete, and it would have added probably 2 years to whatever timeline we have right now, we kept on moving those projects along. So right now, the phase one project, and I should like back up and explain what that is, but first I'm going to say that the phase one project, we awarded it for construction, and construction should start within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is phenomenal. So what we did again, we knew that this is a very, very large project, like $27 million. And we knew we had an immediate need, and the immediate need is to recover the 1 million gallons of water that we lost to the contamination, to at least make us even to where we were at that point. And the second part is to have the capacity so we can abandon the Weinberg treatment plant into the future. So we did the project that way. We created a phase one and a phase two. Phase one is going to allow us to get water from the town of Lexington. It's really coming from the MWRA, but it's coming through their town.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll connect that pipe to one of their pipes. And now we'll get probably about 1 million gallons of water. And hopefully by the end of this year, when that pipe is complete, we'll be able to have that, which that will be a nice emergency hookup connection, if you want to call it, because it's really doesn't have the capacity that we want it to have, but it will be a good start. Phase two takes it from the end of the pipe and it goes all the way into Arlington and connects to the MWRA system. And that pipe should be large enough to carry the entire town of Burlington if the town decides in the future that we don't want to have any water treatment plants. That is not the plan we have currently in place. The plan that we have in place is to maintain the Mill Pond treatment plant into the future. We believe it's a good new
Mm-hmm.
treatment facility. There's no reason for the town to abandon it anytime soon. But if you're just going to spend $27 million and put a pipe in the ground, you better put a big pipe in the ground so you don't have to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
I went to town meeting. We went to town meeting during May, and town meeting supported that we accelerate that phase two of the project. They approved $3.5 million we needed for some construction on phase one, plus design on phase two. So we are currently starting design of phase two with the goal of completing construction by the end of 2022.
Okay.
So hopefully in 2023, I know it sounds like many years out, but hopefully by 2023, we'll be able to be using that new pipe at full capacity.
And how does it work as far as cost of it? I know, not counting the project, but just, water costs. Is it by how much the town uses it? Is it a flat rate? Like, is that one of the advantages of keeping the Mill Pond Reservoir going is, to use some of our own water and draw less from the authority?
That is the biggest advantage, yeah. So the authority's water is more expensive than the water we produce at the Mill Pond treatment plant. Not that much more, but more expensive. So two things happen. One is obviously the way the laws are written in Massachusetts, they want us to use local resources, and that's one of the local resources we have. But at the same time, financially, it's better for us to keep on using the Mill Pond. With the renovation, we completed that in 2008. The plant is not that old, so
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to abandon a plant that is still in good condition. And the water is relatively more, it's cheaper than the MWRA. But with that being said, interestingly enough, the water we produce at the Weinberg treatment plant is almost as expensive as the water from the MWRA. It's a different process. It's wells versus surface water. Pressurized filters, we have to pump the water many times. In fact, we have to pump the water up into the air to aerate the water so we can get anything that is volatile out of the water.
Oh.
All of that costs a lot of money. Electricity is very expensive, with the chemicals as well. So that's going to be, it's not a break even, but it's close enough that as far as cost, buying water from the authority is not going to be a lot more than what it would have cost to produce it from the Weinberg. So our recommendation again is to keep the Mill Pond going. and supplement our water needs with the water from the authority into the future.
And the big question that everybody asks is, so once this is all done, you can water their lawns on a more regular basis?
Well, and that's a very interesting question because the need for a water treatment facility is not so we can water our lawns.
No, I know.
You know, the need for this has to do with redundancy, has to do with water quality, has to do with many other things. In fact, probably the last couple of crises we had related to water capacity happened in the wintertime when people are not watering the lawns. So we needed to have that for the town going into the future, a good water source to supplement ours. And in fact, if our facility, Mill Pond, went to go out for whatever reason, some emergency or whatever will happen, we'll have a pipe large enough that will provide water to the town. Now, having said that, there will be more water available in the summertime. Does that mean that our residents are going to be able to water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Probably not. The regulators, through this process that we're going through, they have a lot of conditions that we need to meet.
Mhm.
And some conditions have to do with being environmentally friendly and being responsible about the use of the water. They don't take lightly that you take water out of a different reservoir to bring it to a metropolitan area and just to use it for watering lawns. I mean, water is a big resource.
Right.
So they will have restrictions. We will have to keep on meeting certain criteria that we currently meet as far as how much water we use. Certainly, I don't anticipate having to have like the water ban we currently have in place, but I wouldn't be surprised if we'll continue to have like every other day water bans or things like that, which most people find is reasonable.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And you know, the restrictions from the middle of the day when most of it's going to evaporate anyway.
exactly. I mean, that's one that would probably stay in place because I mean that's water wasted. Anything you put it out at noontime, it's just going up into and evaporating. So we don't see those going away. Again, don't forget we have to still meet all the other regulations that we have in place as far as how much water we can use. I mean, two of the major numbers that that residents probably are not aware of, but we are required to meet that we know where all the water goes in the town. And we do an accounting of every gallon of water. And the water that is unaccounted, say through leaks or through theft or things like that, can't be more than 10% of the water we produce. Now, we have been able to meet that number for the last 10 years, so we're okay. But another number, more important number, is they have a per capita max that every town can use. And that's 65 gallons per day per capita. Now, we currently meet that number. We have met that number for the last 10 years. We don't anticipate that number changing, but we have to keep track of it. If we see that number creeping up to the point that we almost do not meet the regulation, then we will have to implement other water saving rules in the future. I don't anticipate that again because I think that even during the recent years when there was a lot of watering going on, we still didn't trip that threshold. We still were able to be under. But we have to keep an eye on it.
And last thing, which I think people watching would be interested to know, is what can the average residential home expect to see as far as a difference between what they pay for water now and what they'll pay after 2023?
So we talked about this project 3 years ago and how much it was going to cost. It's $27 million altogether, which is a large number. And we also talk about how it's going to get financed. And it's going to get financed 100% through the water rates. Now, we are increasing the water rates. We are in year 3 of those increases already. And we promise the residents, to the average resident, there's going to be an increase of $10 per year on the water cost. So the average resident who has an average family of 3 or 4 in the house will see a $10 increase per year in the water bill. And interestingly enough, sometimes when I talk to residents about this, they ask me, when is it going to start? And I said, well, we're already in year 3, which means that they haven't noticed the $10.
Right.
Obviously, that will continue for 10 years. And the plan is that during that 10-year time, we would have saved enough money to pay for all the bond issues and all the permitting and everything that we had to do with with this particular project. Obviously, if you use a lot of water, particularly if you use a lot of water watering, which is what we see the most amount being used, it's going to be more than $10 a year.
Right.
But the average, residential use is $10 a year.
All right. Well, it seems like we've kind of told the story from beginning to the future. So 2023, I gather there's still quite a bit of work to do on your end and in your department, but I do thank you for taking some time today and coming down and sort of explaining the whole situation to us.
No, you're welcome. And if I may add just one more thing about
Sure.
the water bans that we have to implement every year. We don't like doing water bans.
No.
This is not something we enjoy doing. But the reason we do it is because we know our capacity. We know to the gallon the capacity we have at Mill Pond Reservoir. We know how much we have a capacity at the Weinberg Treatment Plant. And we have to make sure that it works. We have to make sure that there's going to be water there for your needs as well as in case of an emergency need. And the only way to do that is by seeing what the forecasts are, particularly in the weather, and utilizing that and comparing it to prior use and just doing the numbers and saying, okay, this is what works. So it's unfortunate that we had to increase it to now only allowing people to water one time a week, but that's the only thing that works so far. The forecast doesn't look too good. I mean, it still looks dry. So this may change in the future, but we hope to be able to get through this summer with the current water ban without having to do anything else. So thank you for letting me add that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So always a question that people have. So
Absolutely.
all right. Well, I think we will leave it there. But once again, thank you for coming in and taking the time.
No, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.